Guys, and I have a URL to hold up for your free gift.
Okay. There you are.
Welcome, everybody. And today is the day we have an amazing conversation with me and two of my dearest friends in the whole realm of healing. And we've got a real treat for you because we're going to be talking about healing in an instant. Experiences that Eric and Jillian and I have witnessed about people instantly healing using energy medicine and the power of amazing intention and lots of things like that. So we are thrilled. I just want to introduce my colleagues and friends here. It's Dr. Eric Pearl, worldwide renowned healer and discoverer of the reconnection, and his partner and senior manager who helps to run the whole reconnection empire, which is Jillian Fleer, who's also teaching with him and is now learning about the power of these frequencies too. So we're thrilled to have you here. And of course, you know, we really welcome your comments as we're talking through this hour. So first of all, I just want to welcome Eric and Jillian. So thrilling to be with you.
Hi, Lynn. It's always fun to be with you.
I know.
Great. So I'm going to be talking about some of the things that I discovered with the power of 8, because I never set out to be a healer. I mean, I really admire Eric and his work, and I feel like I'm a journalist and an author, and that's what I do well. But I've come across now thousands of instances of people who have been instantly healed. And it's what I've been trying, my passion is now trying to understand this. So let me start by asking you all a question. Eric and Jillian, tell me about some of the cases you've seen, some of the more amazing cases of people who have been healed in an instant during one of your workshops or seminars.
Well, actually, one of the more amusingly frustrating things that come along is that when we like to give demonstrations of the healings, often we'll ask for someone who's unable to raise their arms up over their heads, and someone will raise their hand and we'll say, show us how high your arms can go. And they go, oh, my arms can only go, oh my God, it happened already. And we go, damn, now we can't show the before and after.
Do you have any clue why this is going on?
I believe it has to do with simply the change in the field that takes place once the consciousness of our full expression of who we are as human beings, as spirit, as our essential essence takes over. And as you know, for example, Konstantin Korotkov and Gary Schwartz and Dr. William Tiller, when they did measurements within the reconnective healing fields, they found that even before we entered the room, even before, sometimes weeks before we entered the space, where the reconnective healing frequencies were supposed to be, there was an increase in energy in the field so dramatic that if it were measured compared to temperature, it was the equivalent of 300 degrees Celsius, which is the equivalent of 572 degrees Fahrenheit.
So amazing. And just for anyone who hasn't heard of these people, Dr. Gary Schwartz, noted psychologist at the University of Arizona, Dr. William Tiller, who studied the power of intention and has looked at healing modalities and the energy emanating from them, particularly Dr. Pearl's work. And also Konstantin Korotkov, a Russian physicist who has developed a way to measure the low level of light, the tiny current of light coming out of human beings. And he excites them and he measures that, and what he's looking at is change. So that's really interesting. So you're looking at something changes in the room, something changes in the field. And about our essence, I love what you said, because that's been so much my experience. I mean, I should just back up and talk about Power of Eight. I mean, probably most people now know that I run intention experiments, and I started running them in 2007, mainly because I didn't believe intention worked. You know, I wanted to investigate it. A lot of things like The Secret had come out, and I kept thinking to myself, you know, well, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about, you know, the power of thoughts? Are we talking about, you know, shifting a quantum particle? Or are we talking about curing cancer? So I thought, okay, I'll put it to the ultimate test. I know all of these scientists in consciousness research, and I've got lots of readers around the world, so I'll just put them together and have my readers send intention all at the same moment and send intention to these targets. So I thought, well, yeah, I'll do this, and, you know, we'll see if it works. And I didn't think it was going to work, but it did work. I mean, we've run about 32 experiments now, and 28 have shown measurable, positive, mostly significant effects. Everything from trying to make seeds grow faster to trying to lower violence in war-torn areas. So I was really mystified by that and amazed. But it's not the point of the story, really, of what happened. What happened to me was I decided to just run workshops around 2008, not long after I met you, Eric. And I didn't know how to run a workshop. I mean, I'm a journalist by background, investigative reporter. You know, I was busting baby selling rings just a few years before that. But I just thought, well, okay, I'll put them in a group and have them send some sort of healing intention to a member of the group with a health challenge. And, you know, I kept thinking to myself, it'll be a feel-good effect, like a facial. You know, that's about it. That wasn't about it. The next day when we had people come back, people were reporting miraculous healings. There was a woman who had migraines her whole life, and suddenly her head was clear. We had somebody with arthritis who walked normally the next day, really bad knee arthritis. And I mean, recently at the Mile High Church in Denver, I mean, I've run thousands of groups, but I really documented this group recently. And, you know, we had a woman who came in with a dislocated shoulder. And she was holding her arm, and it was like 1 out of 10 pain. It was 10. It was 11. And her arm slipped back into place. And there was another woman who was due to have a knee replacement, and she said she felt mitts holding her leg during the group intention. So for me, you know, and by the way, she didn't need a knee replacement afterward. She was healed. And I've seen thousands of cases like this, much more than a facial. And for me, exactly what you said is really important. Feeling our essence, because for me, it's all about group work. And the small group, I think, brings us to a feeling of unity we don't get to experience normally.
You know, I'm really listening deeply to this kind of a discovery. And it always leads, I think, us to the question of, you know, what are the qualities of a spiritual life? How do we find inner peace? Mm-hmm. You know, we have, I think, explored the idea of intention, or in our case, attention, and yet now putting it into practice in the way that you are doing with these groups around the world, and your amazing new book, The Power of Eight. And for us, sort of the exploration of the qualities of a spiritual life, in part, are our ability to know that we have the capacity to heal in an instant. You know, I love Marianne Williamson's quote. She always says this very powerful statement. She says, you know, our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. And I think that when, you know, wasn't your first book, but the book, The Field, and then The Bond. I mean, you have been exploring, not just as an investigative reporter, Lynne, you are a healer. And we know that about you. And you're a healer who has welcomed in all kinds of energy healing concepts to look at. You know, we're very grateful. We have our students read your books because they explain many aspects of what is the phenomena when the infinite sort of supervises what we'll call energy healing. And in the case of reconnective healing, perhaps energy, light, and information in a consort. Mm-hmm. So I think that to see an instantaneous healing, be it in Denver, or I know I follow your group, Intentions of the Week, and, the exploring of where is it really that when we are exchanging in this field, the healing ultimately goes. You talk a lot about altruism. I mean, part of the discovery. And as you know, we tend to believe sort of that at least with the reconnective healing frequencies, there's a three-way exchange. But often this catalyst, this inspiration really is our self-healing. So I loved what you told us the other day. Can you explain that again?
Sure. And this is a big, rich theme. I was talking about altruism and getting off of yourself, because what I really loved about exploring with the Power of Eight was just finding, and also with the big experiments, is that there was some sort of mirror effect. I mean, when I ran some of the big peace intention experiments, I decided to survey them afterward to find out if they had any kind of, experience and how it was for them. Again, not expecting anything. And I got back thousands of answers saying, I felt like I was part of a higher network. I felt energy going up and down my arms. I was crying uncontrollably. I felt like I was part of the tractor beam in Star Trek. But more than that, they also reported thousands of healings, and also healed lives. Their lives were becoming more peaceful. If it was an intention experiment they were part of, they were making up with estranged relatives, or getting along better with their bosses, or, mainly being in love with everybody they came in contact with. They were hugging strangers. I'm thinking to myself, what on earth is going on here? But it was the same thing with the small groups. When people got off of themselves, a lot of people, instead of intending for themselves, they're part of a group where they are selflessly sending out love and healing intention, in my case, to someone else. And that becomes a healer. So let's explore a little bit about this, and then I can tell you a little bit about the science, because this mystified me. But what about you guys? So you found it because your whole motto is heal others, heal yourself. So what have you found?
Yeah, that's it. I think
it started with me witnessing healings of other people at a time when everyone's focus was on me, self-healing. And so when we came up with the book, Hay House said, you need a subtitle. Let's make the main title The Reconnection, and a subtitle. And we played, I remember sitting there playing back and forth, heal yourself, heal others, heal yourself. And I wanted more focus at that time on healing others, because that was what drove and excited me. And so I was hoping that would drive and excite a lot of people and show that it's not just about self-healing. Now, I remember when we speak about simultaneous, or I should say instantaneous healings, I remember fascinating things going on early on my, I remember one of my first national television appearances. I was so nervous. I was green. I was shaking on the inside. I didn't know what would come about. And I was on a very well-known show. And I brought, I believe, two guests on, one who had a healing from cancer, one who had a healing from chronic fatigue syndrome, where she was unable to walk or talk or sleep. Her husband would have to carry her in and out of the bathroom. And all of a sudden, someone from the audience jumped up in full makeup. I knew if someone in the audience was full makeup, this was ambush television, and said, have you ever heard of spontaneous remissions? I don't know what happened to me, but I found myself inside between my green and my shaking. And I said, yes, but isn't it amazing how many spontaneous remissions take place when people experience reconnective healing? And he had no answer. Now, later in listening to us talk about Marianne Williamson's quote about what we fear is being powerful beyond measure, what it reminds me of, and reconnective healing has nothing to do with religion, but I do believe that the laws of nature, the laws of spirituality all seem to apply. One of the things that Jesus had said, who I feel is one of the great teachers, is these things that I do, you shall do and more. This frightens people. The thought that they can do what Jesus did, the thought that they could do even more is more foreboding. And many people will stand around and say, who do you think you are? And what we're doing is we're holding ourselves back, because if this is one of the teachers that we subscribe to, then it becomes our responsibility to challenge our own fears and say, I may be afraid that I'm powerful beyond measure, but this is what one of my great teachers is telling me, and I need to step into that possibility.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the interesting point, is that, this is all of our birthrights. This is not, and we squander it because we don't tap into it. We don't realize that we have this innate ability, and we just need a path. I mean, one of the fascinating things about researching my book, The Power of Eight, was trying to figure out why this is working and who thought of this before me, because I thought to myself, well, somebody had come up with this before me. So I started talking to, and doing as I do, I was talking to Rosicrucians, and I was talking to archaeologists, and I was talking to experts on esoteric religions and all kinds of things, until I came across a sermon by a pastor in the early part of the 20th century who said the Bible, a little bit of it had been mistranslated. And he was talking about the Acts, where Jesus is telling the apostles, it talks about what Jesus taught the apostles, and he's supposedly ascended, and they are supposed to carry on his work and start the church. And what it said over and over again, when he told them to pray, he told them to pray, and the King James Version says with one accord, which is a totally anemic way of expressing what he really said, which is, in the Hellenic Greek, they use the term homothumadon, which meant passionately and with one voice. And so he was telling the apostles, always pray together passionately with one voice. It's a musical term, homothumadon. It means like a Beethoven symphony, individual instruments that come together with this collective sound. And so I looked at the Bible, and it's mentioned about 14, 15 times, and always about them praying, and it in the context of, you do it this way and you will heal and you will be healed. And as you say, it's that power that's innate in you, and you just need to know how to express it. You just need the path. In our case, what we're finding is the small group is one way in.
Yeah. And I think that the concept, again, I'm going to go back to the altruism, because I think it really plays an important role in separating expectation from expectancy. When we are focused on our self-healing, there is a part of, well, we know the neuroscience. Thank you, Joe Dispenza. Thank you, Greg Braden. We know that when we are in expectations, sometimes even the chemicals in our body go into anxiety, and then they really become not our best friend because they're just supporting fear. So by looking at I'm going to say again, the catalyst, the inspiration that we provide it, we refer to the reconnective healing frequencies as an it factor. We look at the characteristics that they reach to us to offer. So we're in a receiving mode, not taking, receiving. And in that receiving mode, we really become scientifically measurable, as well as spiritually inclined, this inspiration. And the inspiration is the offering. It is to be able to altruistically become someone else's witness, become someone else's observer. And I think that is the most nourishing part. It creates the connectivity between us and them. And in your case, the whole group, because I know you told me a lot of the people in your Power of Eight group, again, they recognize their own healing even before maybe the person that they were praying or intending for. So that catalytic exchange, first of all, I think is an integral part of humanity's new healing. You know, you hear many of our colleagues speak about this new human, this paradigm for the new human. And I think that the intention groups, your small groups, I can tell you in our Reconnective Healing training program, and really, interestingly enough, as you know, we changed about a year ago our entire way one learns Reconnective Healing. They start with an online essential 8-hour course, and that is really a very intimate journey. You would think, because it's so personal, they were learning from Eric and from myself in a very one-on-one way for themselves. And yes, it is that, but it really is designed specifically to engage the part of them that you are finding in your research right now, which is they become enabled, activated, aware that they are connected to everything and everyone. And in that, they start to see their impact in another, for another. And I think that yields value. It allows us to yield maybe what we'll call worthiness. You know, and worthiness is a tricky one in spiritual healing, in healing in general. What have you noticed from the participants? Because I know you get to know your classmates and your class students. What have you noticed in the change of their worthiness as they're going through these intention experiments?
That's such an interesting question, Jillian, because, and worthiness is such a perfect word. What happens, I think, is they step out of that worry about themselves because they're focusing on the other. I mean, I can't resist just throwing in a little science here about what happens with altruism. Altruism is a total bulletproof vest. I mean, it is amazing because when you look at the science of altruism, people live longer, they're healthier, they're happier in every regard when they do for other people in any capacity, you know, taking out their neighbor's garbage, anything like that. But here's what happens physically and why it's a big healer. It activates a thing called the vagus nerve, which is a nerve that starts in our neck and winds its way through all the major organs of our body. And it also activates things like the love hormone, oxytocin, which gets released when we're looking after kitties and things like that. It also activates the immune system. So it kind of refreshes the immune system and gets better and better and better. And so it's fascinating to me to see the power of altruism and why this is almost never discussed. As Eric, you said, you know, the whole self-help movement is me, 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 me. It's all about healing me. And what I found is the much more powerful healer is the other. So you asked me, Jillian, what have I noticed about worthiness? One of the best things, first of all, I've found that the group or the big intention groups, as I mentioned, we've got loads of healings, and it oftentimes doesn't matter whether you're a sender or a receiver. In one of our more recent ones, we had a group where they intended twice, one for a woman with stage 4 cancer. And by the way, that woman is stage 1 now. You know, she is back to just 2 tiny nodules. She's done other things besides this healing, but it definitely brought down her numbers, her cancer markers. We also intended for someone whose business was on the rocks, and they were able to diversify, and it's really interesting to hear what happened. But the more interesting story is one of the senders, a guy called Wes, who was, he was a Vietnam vet, and he had been in college in his second year when he got a low lottery number, and they abolished the college deferment for students. So he had to go and fight. And it was so traumatic for him. I mean, this is a guy who was going to be a doctor or a biochemical researcher or something like that, very intelligent guy. And his life just seemed to, he came back very depressed. Life took a downward spiral. The only bright point in his life was marrying his wife, his second wife. She lasted 7 years before succumbing to cancer. He ended up having extraordinary medical bills, lost his house. It was just a terrible story. So I meet him at 65, and he's kind of going through the, what's the use? Everything in my life has been crap. So he intends for these two other people, and afterward, it's like his depression completely lifted, but he also had this extraordinary experience of oneness, something that you've talked about, I want to get into, his feeling of oneness, and that was a big change agent for him. That, you know, the grass was greener, the flowers smelled more beautiful than ever, and that depression has stayed lifted, and it's totally rejuvenated his life. He even had a dream meeting his 19-year-old self, and who somehow communicated to him, don't worry, there's still time. Yeah. And that extraordinary sense of oneness, tell me a little bit about your experiences, because you're saying that, in a sense, that's where people are picking up this other energy.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I want to say two things. First, I want to backtrack. On the online level 1 course, it's not 8 hours. Lord knows I could never sit through an 8-hour course. It is and it isn't. What do I mean by that? Is that the first hour is 3 minutes of one subject, 7 minutes of another subject, 5 minutes of another, 9 of another. And it's like a smorgasbord. You taste a little of this, a little of that, a little of that. And by the time the hour's up, you're going, oh my God, I want more. And then you go to the next hour and the next hour. This is how I need to learn. So this is how we arranged it that way. Now, different area. As we know, everyone is touching and no one is touching. Everything is touching and nothing is touching. Everything is essentially 99.999% empty space. And yet the empty space is not empty at all. It's an informational field. So it only makes sense that when the person you were speaking about who participated in the Power of 8 concept was involved in the healing, that he felt a unity and a oneness. We, you and I, Jillian, approach this in different ways that are really complementary in their different perspectives. We teach people to work one-on-one. I don't know that there's much difference, because I don't know that there's a way to separate a self-healing from a group healing, from a distance healing, from a universal healing, from a world healing, because we are all touching. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think absolutely. But what you're doing is so important, is that when you say one-on-one, somebody's healing somebody else. And that's the factor. That's the thing about, yes, we're all one, but we get to experience it when you're doing a healing on someone else, when you're doing a healing in a group. And it's, in my view, it's that creates some really interesting changes in the field. What we've measured, we've done a lot of scientific studies too. I was trying to figure out what on earth, as my 21-year-old daughter would say, WTF, what was going on? What is going on? And I kept trying to figure that out. So I worked with Life University, which is one of the largest chiropractic universities, and they had offered to have their neuroscience department study people doing the Power of 8. And so they put EEG caps on individuals who were always the sender, not the receiver. And these were just college students who were volunteers. And we ran it 7 times. And in every instance, the people doing the sending demonstrated immediate, huge brainwave changes, where the parts of the brain involved in separation, the parietal lobes that sit back here, that tell us where we end and where everything else begins, they were turned way down. These were people who were experiencing a sense of oneness. And also, all of the areas of worry and doubt, the parts of the brain that are involved in worry and doubt, they were also turned way down. So these were people involved in a state of ecstatic oneness. And so That I think is, and what was fascinating to me is these were all novices, which is another thing I want to talk about with you, because it's not about becoming an expert in something. These are people who had a 13-minute video from me, and that was it. And yet we found changes. So tell me a little bit about that novice part of it.
Yeah, it's such an important aspect, and I'm glad you're bringing it up, because really, the dynamic in reconnective healing tends to be more along the lines of receiver, receiver, the it factor governed and watched over by the infinite, let's say. So we have a little bit of a different, there isn't really a sender and a receiver. A reconnective healing facilitator is really there as a participant, a very actively aware participant, where they're receiving the reconnective healing frequencies. And as we know, thanks to much of your research, the field becomes, I'm going to say, the helper in part. It's facilitating where the reconnective healing frequencies are really reaching, creating a shared space to ignite. And, you know, in reconnective healing, there isn't, and the science isn't showing that these frequencies are engaging the brain centers. They actually are revealing that our novice students, and this is so key, recalcitrant souls who have studied very few things, we're starting to see very left brain engineers and, you know, people who are very engaged at the brain where thinking becomes the most important part. They are going into a state of quiescence within moments. Their brainwaves are showing what a master meditator is capable of achieving in an instant, if you will. And so we're constantly looking at, okay, how do we explain to them that in some ways, the it factor in reconnective healing isn't really concerned so much with what they're thinking, but it is engaged with where their attention is. So again, we move them a little bit out of expectation. We give them a space where expectancy, like a child in a sandbox, where there are all these new toys. You know, you don't ever like see a child, as Eric talks about, go into a sandbox and, you know, they don't muscle test this toy to see if it's a funner toy than that toy. They're just in expectancy, and they are engaged with their intention through curiosity. And we find that this is where the novice really gets to feel, I'm going to say, like the expert. They haven't had to change anything about themselves. They can be sick or well, rich, poor, in a healthy relationship, in a broken relationship. They really understand there's nothing to fix. They're not broken. And so we love that part of where reconnective healing is now able to sort of intersect with those themes, because it really isn't about changing where you are in your present moment. It really is about receiving your present moment. And we struggle sometimes because, you know, what happens when someone isn't healed in an instant? How do they stay in hope, in prayer, in that now moment, if they haven't received what, quote unquote, they came to be healed in an instant? And again, that becoming comfortable as a novice that we are where we are, and life is messy, and love isn't always that perfect little Valentine heart that we draw, that we create that perfect expectation around. You know, as you know, the heart is messy. It's a spiky, ugly, vessel pumping thing. So I feel like your research, intention, our attention is leading people down a very interesting new opportunity. And what is the opportunity? The opportunity to recognize, in one sense, as Eric pointed out, we are innately connected in space-time. I mean, Nassim Harriman is constantly bringing new thoughts to our attention around that. You, again, are bringing many interesting new pieces of research that allow us to not just have to believe, not just have to hope, but to actually witness and see this is the result. when we come together, group, and we work together, and I know your students work week after week together, they are bringing new opportunities for, these healing experiments to take place. So what does it also say? We're coming together again.
Yes.
We are reconnecting again.
And sometimes the novice allows themselves to see more than the expert.
Yeah.
Sometimes the expert becomes the judge, the rose judge who can only see the beauty if the petals are perfect, the baby contest judge who can only choose the best baby because the eyebrows are a certain distance apart. And yet the novice sees the beauty in every newborn, the beauty in every rose.
Well, I think that's so important because we have been basically programmed to think that you have to become an amazing expert in order to learn how to do any of this. And what was really fascinating to me was, once again, after we did our brainwave studies, comparing those signatures to the brainwave studies of Sufi masters in chanting and Buddhist monks involved in ecstatic prayer. These were studies done by Dr. Andrew Newberg of the University of Pennsylvania. And they demonstrated an absolutely identical signature to what we were finding. But it takes years of disciplined practice to become a Sufi master, or, hours of priming to be a Buddhist monk and get into that state of ecstatic prayer. Our guys were total novices. Most of them had never meditated before. They were college students, and they had a 13-minute video for me. Nevertheless, they were placing themselves into this ecstatic state, the state where miracles usually happen, the state of, it was an altered state, a state of that Abraham Maslow, noted psychologist, used to talk about as a peak experience. But they were transported in an instant, and so I came away from that basically getting that, you don't need ayahuasca, and you don't need sweat lodges, and you don't need years of disciplined practice on your knees, crawling up the stairs, et cetera, et cetera. You just need that openness to receive in your instance. And in our case, you need a small group and a common intention and the ability to get off of yourself. And that's really what we're talking about, I think.
And I think that's part of what we're thinking about when we think of the world as the time of the new human. Ann Baldwin, who from the University of Arizona, another researcher, did some studies with reconnective healing practitioners and came up with very similar responses. They measured the light emanations, they measured the brains, and they found that once you step into reconnective healing, you step into a state, you enter a state of quiescence.
Yeah, that's what we mentioned earlier.
Right. And when we step into that state of quiescence too, it comes without the years of this and the years of that. And it's very empowering to find that we are discovering some of the same things in our various roots.
Which allows people to recognize that everyone can be an energy healer. Everyone can open their description and CV, resume, and actually place that on it with respect and honor, and know that they really can participate in all these different ways right now. And I really appreciate that. We have so many people kind of opening that gateway, again, through your intentions group, the Power of Eight, through, wonderful things. Even Charlie Goldsmith, this terrific show that, was on for a short series where he altruistically said, I'm available. And I'm going to explore healing around the world. Oprah's Soul Sunday. Look at the invitations. These are invitations. And if we give our Facebook live streaming listeners anything else from this gathering with us, it's to know this is an invitation This is an invitation to step into a Power of 8 group. This is, or an intention group. This is an invitation to come learn reconnective healing with us. Start with the online essentials and begin a beautiful exploration of what's available. And I think that, this is where we say, don't limit the power of, I don't know if this is you, that might be somebody else's title. Don't limit the power of we. We are now ready to understand the influence that we share with one another, no matter where we live, no matter what language we speak, no matter what gender we are, no matter what orientation we have, education, health, this is key. And in your country alone, you had a breakthrough royal wedding very recently that has rocked the world.
You betcha. You betcha. I know, biracial, unreal, fabulous. I know.
Some people, they're going to step into saying they need a healing. Just for that.
Very interesting, eh? Well, we recently got back the results of 2 big experiments, which just speak to exactly what you were talking about, Jillian, which is last autumn, I decided to run an American Peace Intention experiment, and I did it on Gaia TV. And for 6 days, in half-hour segments, we set intention to what is officially the most dangerous street in America, which is a part of northern St. Louis. It is Missouri. It is the fairgrounds section and a thing called Natural Bridge Avenue. And we waited patiently for 6 months afterward. And we looked at data. Dr. Jessica Utz, who's a statistician from the University of California, looked at the data and found that, we looked at 4 different areas. First, we had focused on violent crime only. So we looked at violent crime in Fairground for 2.5 years before, 2 years before and 6 months afterward. We looked at personal crime, property crime in Fairground. We looked at property crime as a whole in St. Louis, and we looked at violent crime as a whole. And the only area that went down, everything else went up, was violent crime in Fairground. Went down by 43% compared to the year before. And the trend had been for carrying going up. So we bucked the trend, it went down. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Not as interesting as the experiences of the participants. Once again, huge percentage, about half of the people were experiencing big changes in their relationships, feeling more loving and peaceful to everyone, huge number of healings. And then an even more astonishing thing happened with a Middle Eastern experiment I ran a month later. I had been working with a guy called Dr. Salah al-Rashid, who's like the Deepak Chopra of the Middle East. I know you guys know him. And he has a studio in Southern England, and he had the capacity to broadcast to 9 different places where there'd be a camera in those hotel rooms. So he had audiences in 8 different Arab countries, everything from Saudi Arabia to Kuwait, etc. And then he had one audience. I've been working with an Israeli documentary maker, and she set up the 9th camera in Jerusalem with an audience of Jews. So we had Arabs and Jews sending intention together, and we sent intention for an area of violence in the old city of Jerusalem, the Damascus Gate area. Now, we demonstrated effects through REG machines and the Konstantin Korotkov stuff, but the most interesting thing happened afterward with the audiences. Because we had these various screens where I was broadcast and it was a 2-way thing, they could speak to me and they could speak to each other from each location. So we had Arab women standing up and saying, "Your God is my God." We had Jewish women saying to the Arabs, "I love you, sister. It's time, enough with this." And we had love going back and forth. And I just sat there with Salah, and we were just, our mouths were open, because, the big point here wasn't the action. Did we lower violence? Interesting, right? But not the point. The real point was the reaction, the changing of people in participating in this experience of essentially prayer together, of oneness, essentially. And so this is just what you're speaking about. The new human is somebody who gets, I'm not this just lonely person on a lonely planet in a lonely universe. I'm part of something bigger. And as soon as you start feeling that way, big things change.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to be clear that the concept of the new human, I've been hearing that from Barbara Marx Hubbard. I know we're doing a workshop with Lee Carroll in Basel in September, and that's sort of the theme, the new human. So I don't want to suggest any ownership whatsoever. We are going to have an experience with Salah on June 28th in London with his branches. And I'm so glad that you shared this story, because the entrainment provided, and now I want to look at some of the technical part. You were working via satellite through screens, right? There wasn't the quote unquote necessity for this face to face. You really allowed this experiment to show that no matter where in the world you were, what technology to see each other, share each other. I would have been curious to see what the readings might have been as one was talking to the other face to face. Maybe that may have been a little different, or maybe not.
Readings kept changing and improving.
Yes.
And they followed everything that happens to us in Power of 8 groups. They just keep moving up to more, essentially moving away from randomness to some sort of coherence. So it was fascinating to see that. But we have the proof in what, enemies sending love to each other.
See, to me, you use the word proof, and I would say this is the theme that maybe this great light worker Jesus meant when he said, these things you do, I do, you shall do, and more. This is the more. What you are speaking of now is that more. And I'm really, I'm touched, and you've made us very excited now to have our conference with Salah, because I know that that's very breakthrough, how he's organized that.
Actually, you've got my brain going.
It is?
Yes, it
How
is.
is
It's
it?
going somewhere. And where it's going is something we'll probably talk about offline, because it'll take a little discussion. But I'd love to look at coordinating a study together.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Well, it'll be interesting because we've got similarities, we've got differences in the way we go about things, but it would be a really fascinating thing to talk about, definitely. And I think what we're coming together and getting, and there's one area more I want to talk about, which is time and space.
Good.
We talked about, when we were preparing for this, we talked about some really interesting stuff that